There is a place in all of us reserved for the uncluttered simplicity of good thought. It is a harbor for sweet memories and special moments. It's a refuge where things are remembered through the innocence of a child's eyes. It's a place of carousels and unicorns, of treehouses and slumber parties, and of backyard tents and whispered secrets with a trusted friend. Here, puppies stay puppies. Kittens stay kittens. And your favorite pet is as brave as you wished. Hugs are plentiful here. In bare feet and cutoffs, battles are fought on stick horse chargers, and the white knights always win. In short, it's an endless summer camp of swimming hole days and lightning bug nights. But in 1977, at a Girl Scout camp in Oklahoma, all of that changed.
Camp Scott was a 400-acre Girl Scout camp located in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. For 50 years, its pristine wilderness had been the summer retreat for thousands of young girls.
A place where the children felt safe, even though there were dangers that lurked in the nighttime sounds, and they imagined the little beasties, as they called them, the snakes and the rodents traveling amongst the leaves, making noise. It was a great opportunity to explore, to be adventuresome, but to always have the companionship of your unit leaders and your friends and the other Girl Scouts in the area. It was, I think, one of the most thrilling places to be for a young woman, where she could grow and explore and stretch herself while living in a group and learning to share friendships and responsibilities and jobs.
Previous day, busloads of children had pulled through the gates at Camp Scott to drive down the road called Cookie Trail. Children crowded to the left side of the bus to look out of the window. Some of them chanted in unison the names of the signs that designated the camp units: Osage, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw. Chanting grew louder as the excitement built. Everyone had seen their sign except the Kiowa unit. One of the older girls who had been there before explained that the Kiowa unit was on the outer edge of the camp on the other side of the Quapaw unit. As darkness fell, a thunderstorm struck and continued into the night. "27 girls had been assigned to Kiowa unit. Lori Farmer, age 8. Denise Milner, age 10. And Michelle Gousset, age 9. They were assigned to Tent 8. A clerical error had assigned the 4th camper to another unit. Tent 8 was the furthest most tent from the counselor's tent. Because Kiowa was the camp's most isolated unit, Tent 8 was the most isolated tent in the camp. A counselor in the Comanche unit noticed a dim light in the woods. It appeared just beyond the tree line surrounding the camp. She knew that no one should be in that area and pointed her flashlight in that direction. As the beam of light hit the trees, the dim light went off. She turned her flashlight off and waited. In a few moments, the wane light returned and began moving northwest in the direction of the Kiowa unit.
I don't know if I went to sleep or whether I must have. I don't know what time it was, maybe even midnight or past midnight or so. I woke up and I heard noise coming from an area kind of off the road by our tent. It was kind of intermittent. It wasn't continuous. Something like a cross between a frog and a bullhorn or something. It was low and kind of guttural. It wasn't language. It didn't really seem human. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. So I thought that I better go out and check. And I think I still heard some kids. I don't know. And I woke Dee just momentarily to say, "Do you hear that?" And it was like, it sounds like an animal or something. And so I went out with my flashlight and started walking over that way. And it kind of like how an animal would do if you pointed a light at it and stop what it was doing. And still couldn't really tell where it was coming from, but it didn't. I guess I'm not too far removed from, the horror movies or whatever. I didn't want to go over and have it jump out of the bush at me or something. So I turned around and went back and walked the tents, walked around the unit, and everything was quiet. All the tents were quiet, and I went back to bed and went to sleep.
The light appeared in the Kiowa unit around 2 o'clock in the morning. It would disappear for a few minutes, then reappear suddenly on the other side of the unit. As the counselors slept, the flaps of the tent were taken off hook screws. Purses and glasses were taken. The light then moved towards tent 6. The tent flap was jerked open, and the light flooded the tent. The flap dropped back down, and the light moved towards the back of tent 8. In Arapaho, Kiowa, Quapaw, and Cherokee units, the strange guttural sound was heard throughout the night. In Quapaw unit, a girl who knew Laurie Farmer heard a little girl crying for her mother. She remembered how Laurie had once been frightened at a previous overnight campout and wondered if maybe she was unable to sleep.
I woke up. My alarm went off. I wanted to beat most of the staff up to the staff house so I could get some warm water for my shower. And the sun was just kind of breaking through. I don't think it rained anymore that night. The water dripping off the trees is just kind of continuous. And so it was already kind of humid and everything in the morning. And I grabbed my stuff I needed for my shower, and as I walked out of the tent and onto the road, I was heading up the road, and I looked to something caught my attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see kind of on the other side of the fork of the road something laying there. I could see there were sleeping bags, and I thought they must have delivered some of the stray luggage and stuff that maybe hadn't made it to our unit. I thought that some of the sleeping bags must have come off the truck, and I just walked over and saw a little girl laying just off the road.
I remember looking around in the woods trying to make some sense out of what was happening, and we had a dead child, and I started to think, well, she must have gotten out of her tent, and could an animal have done that? I just remember not being able to understand, and my counselors and the nurse were beginning to fall apart, and then it dawned on me there were 2 others missing. As we looked around when we realized that Denise was dead, we did notice the sleeping bags adjacent to, but several yards off. And my husband and one of the camp counselors walked over to the sleeping bags and picked them up, feeling the weights in the individual bags. Richard, my husband, then knelt down and felt through the bags and determined that there were bodies or parts in the bags. The children were so small or had been crumpled so that it was almost unbelievable that there were children in the sleeping bags. So I got on the phone and I called the Highway Patrol, right in the phone book of emergency numbers, and I told them that I had need of an ambulance. I had need of 3 ambulances. I told them that apparently there were 3 dead children. I said I have no idea if it's a homicide, but that's what I needed.
The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, or OSBI, was to head the investigation, and agents from Tahlequah, which was the capital of the Cherokee Nation, and Tulsa had already started to arrive. All of the elements of a modern, high-profile investigative team were in place. But in the hills overlooking Camp Scott, something was happening that defied 20th century logic.
He stood below the rock overhang, which was now his home. He watched a flock of vultures circling, gliding in a descending spiral to the valley below. Taking a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, he knelt and brushed dirt and debris from a small area. Intermittent breezes brought the sound of screaming children and rumbling diesel buses. The screeching of the birds grew louder, as if to signal a death find in the valley. A shrill scream of a siren signaled more panic from the valley. He paid little attention as he broke the filters from the cigarettes and stacked green cedar branches in 4 small piles. Lighting the tobacco and cedar boughs, he closed his eyes and whispered the incantations. A warm wind blew tobacco and cedar smoke to the valley, where the day before children had laughed and played.
This was a crime scene like none I had ever been to before. The best way to describe it would be the reverence of a church. People were talking in low whispers. They were quiet. As I look back at it now, I don't even recall birds singing. We walked over and there were 2 bags. I know the first thing I was struck by is how tiny, tiny, tiny the figures were in the sleeping bags. I don't know why I never related, at least to myself, that these were tiny, tiny children. They took up only one small portion of the sleeping bag. And laying near the sleeping bag was a little black girl about probably 10 years old, and somebody had covered her with one of the sleeping bags. So we opened the first sleeping bag, and there was a tiny little blonde-headed girl laying in the sleeping bag. And I remember Kerry, as he snapped the picture, as we opened the sleeping bag, all he could say is, "My God, my God." And they declared her dead. And we checked the third bag, which contained another little small girl, darker-headed, who was bound with her hands behind her back. And, of course, she was dead, too.
With tape, rope, and carefully sewn gags, the murders had been carefully planned. Tent number 8 was the most isolated tent in Camp Scott's most isolated encampment. With the storm covering his movements, the killer entered the back of the tent and struck the children as they lay on their bunks. Patterns of splattered blood suggested that Michelle Gousset and Lori Farmer had been killed inside the tent, and that Denise Milner had been dragged or carried through the woods and then killed. The killer then made a feeble attempt to cover up the crime by wiping the blood from the tent floor with mattress covers and towels. These were stuffed in the sleeping bags with the dead children. The bags were then carried to the location where they were found. The other children were not told about the murders. They were loaded on buses and returned to Girl Scout headquarters in Tulsa. Parents didn't know if their child was murdered until the buses arrived. Michelle Gousset had been a scout since 1974 and had been to camp the previous year. She was a healthy, sturdy little girl who was active in sports and a member of a local soccer team. The last time her parents saw Michelle was when she waved goodbye to them as the bus pulled out from the Girl Scout headquarters in Tulsa. Michelle was murdered on the day before her parents' anniversary.
She was very excited, and she came down the stairs and sat on my lap and told me that she was going to miss me, but she wanted to make sure that I would take care of her plants. Her African violets were her specialty, and she wanted to make sure that I would water them and take care of them.
And Michelle was kind of funny because it was like a premonition that she kissed us goodbye, but she wanted to be kind of like herself. It was like that she was going away and never going to come back.
They knocked on the door, and they said that they had something to tell me and about Michelle. And I said, is there a problem? And they said, we need to come in. And they introduced themselves, you know. And I said, is she hurt? And they said, well, come in and sit down. And then it was at that point they said that there had been an accident at camp. And they never did tell me that she had been murdered.
A friend of mine came here and kind of helped me fight off the press. We had a very, and I would say, obnoxious person from the newspaper came to the door and demanded a picture. And at that point, I probably was going to punch him out, but I didn't think that would be the smartest thing to do. So we went ahead and we got a picture and gave it to him. Not the picture I feel was the best of Michelle, but the one that I would be willing to give up. We finally turned the TV on, and that's how we learned how she died.
Lori Lee Farmer was beautiful, and she was brilliant. She had been advanced a grade and was a year younger than the other children in her class. In fact, she was the youngest camper at Camp Scott. Saturday would have been Lori's 9th birthday, and her parents had planned to celebrate it with her at the camp.
And I received a call from the executive director of the Girl Scout organization. And later we found out that we were the third people that she called. First she called their insurance company, then she called their attorney, then she called us. She told me that in a very brief statement, basically, that Lori and two other girls were found dead out some distance behind their tent. No explanation, nothing else. Not that there was any violence involved.
I had a hard time not letting her go this particular year because everyone was going somewhere to camp. She wasn't real adamant about it being Girl Scout camp. She wanted to go somewhere to a camp, and she had actually picked two, the Y camp and Girl Scout camp. Primarily, I was the one who chose the Girl Scout camp over the Y camp. And that's something that I have to deal with myself, in that was my decision. Also, the week that Lori went to camp was my decision. And that's a decision that rests pretty heavily with me.
Doris Denise Milner had been excited about attending camp. But the thought of leaving her mother and her 5-year-old sister had caused her to be apprehensive. She had to be reassured every step of the way.
She was getting weird about going. She had decided she really didn't want to go. She wasn't sure that she would like it. But I convinced her that she should go and try it, that it would help her be more independent, and that if she didn't like it, all she had to do was call and we would come and get her, that she didn't have to stay.
Before the bus left the Girl Scout headquarters, Mrs. Milner had boarded the bus to let Denise know that she could call home if she got lonely. A straight-A, award-winning student, she had just been accepted to the prestigious Carver Middle School.
Her little sister, Kathy, was only 5 then, and at the time I didn't think much about what she was saying because I felt like she was just wanting attention because Denise was getting so much attention. She asked me what happens when people die. And I tried to explain it to her the best I could. And she said, well, what if everybody dies? And I told her that people are being born every day. So the world just continues, because as people die, other people are being born. So she said, Mama, tomorrow everybody's going to die. And they were dead the next day.
OSBI agent Larry Bowles, a Cherokee and a resident of Tahlequah, met the ambulance at the medical examiner's office in Tulsa.
I'd investigated a lot of homicides before this, but I wasn't really ready for what I saw. It was obvious they had been sexually assaulted. There was an overkill. Excessive force was used to subdue these little girls. Then when Dr. Hoffman got to the third sleeping bag, he unzipped it, and it was Lori Farmer. And he opened the sleeping bag and laid the side of it back. And I'll never forget what she looked like. She looked like she was asleep. And I thought maybe she'd wake up. But I knew that wasn't possible. She was just at peace. She had a flashlight stuck between her legs, just like she went to sleep and wanted to make sure that she could find her flashlight, should she need it during the night. But she was, lying there so at peace, just like a little baby asleep. And I kept wanting her to wake up because I could see no injuries on her. And I thought, she can't be dead. And I took her out of the sleeping bag, laid her on the table. I still saw no injuries. And as I looked at her in the sleeping bag, the only thing I was hoping for, after I finally convinced myself that she was dead,
I was hoping that maybe at least one of the little girls hadn't been sexually assaulted. Maybe just one of them hasn't been. And as the medical examiner pulled a sleeping bag away from her, I could see her panties had been pulled up and they were twisted to one side. And I knew then she would never wear her underpants that way. And I knew that she had probably been sexually assaulted.
Forensic chemists and crime scene technicians swarmed over Camp Scott. A red flashlight, a roll of duct tape, and a nylon rope were found next to the bodies. But one thing bewildered investigators. Why had several pairs of prescription glasses been taken from the tents throughout the camp? It appeared that the killer would try the glasses and then discard them when the prescription was wrong. The duct tape and the nylon rope found at the crime scene and used to tie the children had been stolen from a farmhouse located a mile from Camp Scott. The following day, the farmer passed a lie detector test. By the end of the day, a Tulsa newspaper screamed, "Lie detector test given here in Girl Scout slangs." The articles continued on another page. The man's picture appeared below the subtitle, "Slayer." He was hospitalized after receiving crank calls and being hounded by reporters. Reporters questioned the investigation and the abilities of the investigators. And the police, they questioned the ethics, the professionalism of the press.
Cherokee. The name conjures images of great warriors, classic battles, and stoic dignity. According to legend, the Great Spirit gave the Cherokee fire and told them as long as the fire burned, the Cherokee would survive and prosper. Medicine men still keep the fire in a secret place near Gore, Oklahoma. The Cherokees' belief in spiritualism, ancient power, and magic, which they simply call medicine, are kept alive, especially in the hills of northeastern Oklahoma. Many Cherokees still solve critical problems by smoking the sacred tobacco or consulting medicine men whose powers are legendary. The mysticism rarely surfaces, however, and to the white man, even close friends and neighbors, it's all but non-existent. The Cherokee are a proud and a private people who do not share their medicine with whites.
Tracking dogs were flown from Pennsylvania to search for the killer. The press dubbed the dogs Wonder Dogs. The owner claimed they cracked an 8-month-old case in Pennsylvania by picking a suspect out of a lineup. They promised a break in the case within 48 hours. At a command meeting, it was mentioned that a Cherokee named Gene Hart had escaped from a county jail and was still at large in the area. A local football hero, he had been convicted of raping 2 pregnant women. The seriousness of the moment was broken, as one of the agents said a Cherokee medicine man had placed a curse on the dogs, and they would soon die. Everyone laughed except Agent Harvey Pratt, a full-blood Cheyenne Arapaho.
When I get involved in those investigations of Indians who were talking, and the rumors that we heard during the investigation of the little girls that were coming out of the Indian culture, especially since that was a heavily concentration of Native Americans up in there. So we started getting a lot of that, and I started picking up a lot of that. And I had to consider that, especially of things after I had learned on my own through the investigation that led towards Indian culture and towards Indian suspects.
Agents' laughter about the medicine man's curse on the dogs rang hollow when news came that one of the Wonder Dogs had died suddenly, probably from heat prostration, it was nervously suggested. In a cave overlooking Camp Scott, OSBI agent Arthur Linville found a newspaper matching that found in the flashlight at the crime scene.
Certainly the odds against the newspaper found inside the flashlight, which was apparently used to help make the contact with the battery, being the same edition as that found at a remote location in a cave 3 miles south or southwest of the crime scene, I thought that the odds against that were astronomical.
Agent Linville also found tape and plastic material used to cover the flashlight lens, 2 photographs of women, a red pair of lace panties, and the glasses taken from the counselor's tent in Kiowa unit. The newspaper, tape, and plastic material linked the cave to the flashlight found next to the bodies. But who had used the cave? The only clue was the crumpled pictures. The pictures of the mystery women were printed in newspapers and shown on television across the nation. It was almost 9 p.m. when Agent Pratt slipped quietly out of the command post and walked in the darkness to a small creek 100 yards north. He had decided to smoke himself the Indian way, with cedar boughs. The lush white cedar smoke passing over the body during prayer is the Indian's way of cleansing and purifying the spirit, and to provide clarity of thought. He was interrupted by 3 agents who asked if they could join the sacred ceremony.
I said, well, yeah, you can. I think it's great. That's fine. I also had some additional medicine at that time that I had gotten from a medicine man that said that it would be used to seek help and gain help for you whenever you were looking for this killer, that this medicine would help you. And so I took this Indian medicine that was given to me, and I put it in the fire, knowing that the smoke was going to go up into the skies and go all over. And I told him, I said, this medicine will go out, and it's to help us. Somebody's going to touch, and they're going to help us. They're going to come forward and help us solve this case, give us some information. So we all smoked together as brothers, a regular cigarette, tobacco, without a filter. And the phone rang. The phone rang from our mobile headquarters, and it was
Jerry Sunderland, who was a former OSBI agent who was a warden at Granite Reformatory, saying that at least one of the women could be identified.
It happened immediately after that fire, after we did that ceremony. And they asked me, several of them asked me if I was a medicine man at that point, because it was amazing the way it happened. I was blown away. I was really surprised. And so were they. I could see it in their faces.
The pictures had been taken by a prison officer who moonlighted as a wedding photographer. They'd been developed by Jean Leroy Hart, the escaped burglar and rapist.
And they asked me if I was a medicine man, and I said, no, I'm not. I'm not a medicine man. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ.
Harris, the last wonder dog, inexplicably ran in front of an automobile and was killed. Medicine Man's prophecy had been fulfilled.
In Tulsa in 1966, Gene Hart kidnapped at gunpoint 2 pregnant women. He bound them with plastic duct tape and nylon rope, forced them into the trunk of his automobile, and drove them toward the oil refineries of West Tulsa.
After he stopped, I opened the trunk and got me out and put me in the back seat. That's when he raped me. First time. And sodomized me. And I was begging him not to. And he was just incoherent. He wasn't speaking, he was just making strange noises. Real strange noises. It wasn't a real, like somebody in pain or somebody just ouch or a growl, or it was, and so we went to enter, never, his own little sound that he has, or he made.
Were these strange sounds the same as those heard by the counselor the night of the murders? Although the list of similarities between these attacks and those on the scouts grew as the attacks continued, one singular event defied coincidence.
He taken my glasses. He used them before in the car on the way out there in the first place when I was sitting up. He'd used my glasses before. He wanted to try them on. And my glasses were gone.
He placed a rag in the women's mouths and wrapped the tape around their mouths and eyes. Next, he taped their nostrils, their last source of air. He covered the women with brush and leaves and left them to strangle and smother to death. But something else happened.
I took all that tape, I don't know how many times, right, but I popped it off. I broke it off. And that's the only thing that saved us. I broke all the tape, and I just, God helped me. He broke the tape for me. So I knew I was going to make it.
Ten days after the murders, a farmer working in a remote area about 2 miles from the Girl Scout camp caught a glimpse of a man sitting in a cave.
And I noticed immediately was that first fire. And then when I looked, I noticed that there were other little fires scattered around it, kind of in a half a circle, back coming around this way, and to circle it up by 4 fires. 4 is very significant in Indian culture for the 4 seasons, the 4 directions, winds, 4 major colors, things like that are used in ceremonies. And I noticed the cigarette butts, and we found a book of matches, and I saw the cigarette butts, and I noticed that the filters had been snapped off of them. Well, to me that meant something, because I was aware that sometimes when you smoke among Indians, and they smoke for a reason, and they're going to cement or consecrate something, they would smoke. We're going to smoke over this. It's good medicine. We're going to smoke over it. They break the filter off to get rid of if they don't have a pipe or their own tobacco, they would take away that last piece of civilization and throw the filter away and smoke it direct of a cigarette. Well, I noticed there was a couple of butts that the filters had been broken off, and then the filters, a couple of pieces, and then I saw the remains of the little pieces of cedar branches, and at that point I assumed and felt relatively sure in my mind that someone was down there that was an Indian and had used this as either to purify or to sanctify himself and smoked over it. And I think that's what that cave was for. The man had used that to help himself. Indian medicine.
A light fog hung like a morning veil over the ground, and a serenade of tracking dogs echoed through the hollows. This ground had not always been a Girl Scout camp. Legend had it that it was sacred ground. Through millennia, swift running water had gouged out the valley that the locals had simply called the Hollow. This place was a perfect mask to disguise its mysteries. A world not known to whites, but a magic that had existed as long as man. This magic was not the satanic power popularized by books and movies. It was a natural power, born from the earth, and suckled by a chosen few called medicine men.
I'll refer to tobacco. The raw product of tobacco is brought to a medicine person with a request for a desired result. This tobacco is taken to a particular place and remade by ceremony. This ceremony, which I won't get into the to the ceremony itself, but the breath of the person is involved. The energy or the power of running water is involved. The particular location of the place where this tobacco is remade is very important. But most specifically, this tobacco is remade by this medicine person to be given to the requesting party to accomplish a purpose for which they have requested.
To some Cherokee medicine men, the ultimate in power was a tobacco called the Old One, or the Ancient One. Legend said that before man walked on the face of this earth, the Old One had grown in a primeval forest in the shade of a great tree. The old tobacco was believed to have the power of life and death.
The old tobacco, the ancient tobacco, is nearly all gone, with the exception of those very people that recognize this policy, this possibility that this tobacco will be gone someday. And they have held on to that very, very small portion. And this old tobacco, this ancient one, is a part of these people. And they still use it. It's the one with all the power, with the great power.
My younger brother, who is also a police officer, got involved in this investigation with me because I wanted someone to be with me into that Indian country at doing undercover work. We were undercover. And I needed someone that was comfortable, that I was comfortable with, that was comfortable with the ways and things like that. So he got involved in the investigation with me, and we went to a medicine man one night who we asked him to give us something to help us. He gave me some medicine for my bullets, Indian medicine for my bullets, to make them accurate, to be used so they would only go to the guilty party or whatever, And he gave me some medicine that would help me hide, and he gave me some medicine to help me track somebody. If I got on the trail of an investigation of somebody, then once we reached a certain point, if I put this medicine down in a track or in the concept or the trail, same idea, that I would never lose this man. I would be on him all the time. See? So I had several things, and we did it all in duplicate for myself and my brother. And I used all that stuff. I used all of those things under the restrictions that was given to me, because I wanted to make sure that things were done properly according to, and since I felt like we were dealing with Indians. What we were really so concerned about was that there were so many things happening that a good investigator had to be concerned about, and then someone who was raised in the Indian culture, things that were starting to happen during this investigation, like even the tracking dogs, We were concerned about the rumors of him being able to shape change and to move about, and things that he had said to jailers, and laughing at them about how he'd eluded them and above and below, and when the dogs struck a trail from the camp, and they went through the camp there and they hit that meadow, and they went to the clearing of that, out in the middle of that field, and they just stopped. And they quit, and they just walked in circles, and the trail didn't go anywhere. From in the middle of that field, for some reason, the scent just died right out in the middle of that field, like he went off into the air. And you saw things like that just compounded what you had heard as in the investigative talk and the rumors, and you were concerned. I got concerned. So when my brother and I went up there, we went and asked for Indian medicine, and we spent many nights up there, out in those hills. And if you were plagued with these thoughts about medicine and spiritual spirits and things like that, and and someone who was still possibly there. And I never felt like he was gone. I always felt the presence that he was there. And we spent those nights there, and we were concerned about him changing into animals. And one night up on the hill, my brother and I, late at night, had a very small fire going. It wasn't really cold, but we had a fire going there, more for the comfort of a fire than to sit there in total pitch darkness. It's more for the comfort of the fire, the warmth. And I was sitting there, and both across from one another, and a cat pounced into my chest and onto my lap, and hollered, and then broke away and ran off into the darkness. It startled me, frightened me, because of all of those things that we had heard about him being able to change into flying creatures or animals. And it shook both of us for the night, you know. We just had hardly any sleep at all.
During the course of the investigation, I developed an informant, but it was a couple of days before I actually told my supervisor that this person had come to me, had contacted me with information on Gene Hart. And I had to do some soul searching for a couple of days because I knew when I went to my supervisor was going to want to know who the informant was. And I had given my word that I would never divulge this person's name. And based on that, the informant would keep giving me information as long as I would protect his anonymity.
The informant told him that Hart had been taken to a medicine man in the notorious Cookson Hills area.
Generally, medicine men in that form don't judge a person. If an Indian needs help or needs a place to stay, and that person is a believer, generally they just move in. There's no questioning. If Gene Hart went someplace and said he needed help, the medicine man would let him move in with him, and I think that's what happened.
Criticism of the investigation grew, as did admiration for Hart. The government's own evidence seemed to exclude him as the murderer. After all, there was sperm in the victims, and Hart had had a vasectomy. With this seemingly incontrovertible evidence, many investigators also had doubt about Hart's guilt. And yet, every resource the government had to offer was used in an attempt to capture him. 40 FBI agents, as well as every agent on the OSBI, pursued him. He had eluded the National Guard, the Highway Patrol, and over 600 searchers. Bloodhounds, wonder dogs, and heat-seeking aircraft had failed to find him. Every day that Hart remained free added to his reputation and to his cause. The enigmatic and mysterious young fugitive was a celebrity, someone to say you had known. Gene Leroy Hart, burglar, rapist, accused murderer, and a football star, had become a folk hero.
On the last evening of her life, Denise Milner wrote a letter to her mother.
Dear Mom, I don't like camp. It's awful.
The first day it rained. I have 3 new friends named Linda, Lori, and Michelle. Michelle and Lori are my roommates. Mom, I don't want to stay at camp for 2 weeks. I want to come home and see Kathy and everybody.
Your loving child, Denise Milner.
A few minutes after completing the letter, Doris Denise Milner, age 10, was dead.
On April the 6th, Larry Bowles met with Mike Wilkerson, who had been placed in charge of the manhunt a week before.
We decided to go ahead and confront the medicine man's wife at that point.
I want the man that killed 3 little Girl Scouts, and you all are hiding him. If you're playing a game with us, we're through playing games. We're starting to indict people. We know a lot about you, and like I said, I'm not interested in you all, but we're interested in Gene Leroy Hart, and we want him. And if you don't cooperate with me today, you're going to be indicted by a federal grand jury. And if it's a game to you, I can assure you it's stop being fun right now. I can tell you one more thing, that up to this point, the three fathers of these little girls, they're pretty uptight. Even though it's been almost a year ago, they're still pretty uptight about it. One's a police officer, and one's a doctor, one's a businessman in Tulsa. They have been calling us repeatedly, wanting to know. They know that we know who the mediator is. We haven't given them any names. But I can assure you, by the time the sun goes down tonight, they're going to know your names and your addresses.
Agent Bowles' bluff paid off. The woman took Harvey Pratt in an unmarked van to scout the area where Hart was hiding.
Pulling up there just before we get to make the raid, and I mean the hunt is still fresh in your nose, and you're on ready, and we pulled up, and we're waiting for the lead car by Mike Wilkerson. And
so as we stopped our vehicle, I looked around to my right and saw Mike and the other agents coming up in front of the residence.
As soon as we see that car in up to the front, we all bail out over the ridge, and we rush across from the left side through the briars, and we're running through these thorn bushes and briars, and I can remember pulling on my clothes and pulling on my body, but the adrenaline is pouring, and we run through there, and we see the back door crack
open, and there was Gene Hart, and he was bent over and stuck his head out the back door. I pointed my shotgun at him, and he was off safety, and I could have shot him right then, but I didn't. And I yelled at him. I said, Gene, state agents, you're under arrest. We have you surrounded. I said, give up. And he ducked back inside, slammed the back door.
Adrenaline pumping pretty good about that time. And looked at Jack Lay, who had pulled his car in front of me, and he was at a dead run by this time. And he kicked the door of this old house. We burst in. There was a rather large Indian man, and he broke to run out of the front room. And Jack Lay said, do you want to die today? And the man stopped. He went ahead and was cuffed, and we took him outside and laid him on the ground.
And my first view of him is he's laying on the ground. Since I had used my medicine on him, that first thought that I had, since his soles were pointing towards me, I just went over and tapped his feet because of the medicine that I had used, and I took my medicine back from him, from my trail medicine.
I reached down and got him by the arm, going to help him up. And as I got him to his feet, I asked him, I said, you killed those little girls, didn't you? He said, you'll never pin it on me.
It didn't escape anyone's attention that Gene Hart was wearing women's glasses.
We subsequently transported him to the Tahlequah OSBI office without him muttering a word on the way down there. He never said a word.
The largest manhunt in the Southwest had ended in the legendary Cookson Hills. Somehow, it seemed appropriate. The land that had hidden Pretty Boy Floyd, Rufus Buck, and Belle Starr added yet another name, that of Gene Leroy Hart. Experts found that Gene Hart's hair matched exactly the hair found on the tape used to bind Denise Milner's hands. But one thing could blow apart the case against Hart. Gene Hart had had a vasectomy. If he was innocent, there would be no sperm in his semen. But the samples revealed Gene Hart's vasectomy had not been successful. Sperm was present in the semen. In fact, chemists believed the sperm was so unusual that it could possibly be matched with that found in the victims. Hart hired attorneys from the Native American Center in Oklahoma City. Now, many of Hart's supporters were disappointed that he had chosen the young attorneys when it was believed that he could have any attorney in America. But they were competent and they were energetic advocates.
On the last evening of her life, Michelle Gousset wrote a letter to her aunt.
Dear Aunt Karen, how are you?
I am fine. I am writing from camp. We can't go outside because it is stormy now. Me and my tent mates are in the last tent in our unit. My tent mates are Denise Milner and Lori Farmer. My room is shades of purple.
Love, Michelle.
A few minutes after this letter was written, Michelle Heather Gousset, age 9, was dead.
The Mays County District Attorney decided to run for Attorney General. To many, his campaign capitalized upon the murders and the manhunt for Hart. This notion gained credibility when the campaign manager ran an ad in a Tulsa newspaper soliciting money for shares in a book about the murders. The phone number in the ad checked to the prosecutor's campaign headquarters, and it was discovered the district attorney had signed a contract to share in the profits of a book. Newspapers and television stations carried a picture of a lawyer wearing a T-shirt on which was inscribed, "Gene Hart for Attorney General," and "Stop the Mays County Railroad." The district attorney would soon withdraw from the case, saying he had suffered an emotional, physical, and mental drain. S.M. Buddy Fallis Jr., Tulsa County District Attorney, agreed to take on the job of principal prosecutor. Because of the line of questioning at the preliminary hearing, agents believed they had missed a vital piece of evidence during the search of the cabin where Hart was captured. The cabin was searched again and several more items were found. Among these were a toy corncob pipe and a small blue mirror found in a shaving kit on the refrigerator. These items were identified as belonging to a Camp Scott counselor. More importantly, they placed Gene Hart at Camp Scott at or near the time of the murders.
Investigators returned to the cabin and found some item allegedly linked to the girls in the cabin in plain view, which was, if in fact that happened as reported, was so absurd that a lot of people just immediately saw or believed that this was a trumped-up deal.
What was newsworthy and caught the attention of the media were those people who complained about racial injustice or trumped-up charges or trumped-up evidence. And that, of course, that always makes good news. That doesn't make justice. That just makes good news.
The trial day had finally arrived. Many of the people in the front of the courtroom had been among the 400 Locust Grove and Pryor residents who had attended a benefit chicken dinner which helped raise money for Gene Hart's defense fund.
On the one particular day up there, there were 4 medicine men in the Mays County Courthouse at the same time. And that was to influence the outcome of that trial that was going on there.
We were the enemy. When we walked in the courtroom, we seemed to be the guilty party. And everyone was rallying around their hero. And it was a shock.
A friend of ours who said, after reading an article about Hart and talking about his athletic ability, that he expected him to be drafted by the Dallas Cowboys after this. It was strange. It was very strange. It was strange to be up there and go in a restaurant to eat and see a jar with to donate money for Hart's defense.
I didn't really feel that we were amongst a lot of friends.
Likewise, you don't have the right to say, hey, wait, things aren't right here. We want to move the trial to a more neutral location. Change of venue is not within the rights of the prosecution and the victim. It's only a right that the accused has.
One of the most hurtful things to me was when the person accused in her child's death, Gene Leroy Hart, held an interview, a press conference, and he announced it a couple of days ahead, and the news media submitted questions. He would only review those questions and pick ones that he wanted to answer.
And on the day of the interview, 2 stations in Tulsa broke into their regularly scheduled programs to air that interview.
I am not a hero. I have no desire to be a hero. But maybe I represent the fears and doubts that many people have about any system that has the means and the power to overwhelm each of us, each and every one of us.
During the next few days, the prosecutor presented his case. The hair from the tape used to bind Denise Milner matched Hart's hair. Dr. John McLeod, America's foremost authority on male fertility, testified Hart's sperm matched that found in the victims. The pictures of the women found in the cave linked him to the tape and the newspaper found in the flashlight left at the crime scene. And finally, the mirror and the corncob pipe found where Hart was captured were identified as belonging to a camper who was at Camp Scott on the night of the murders. Rules of evidence prohibited the prosecution from introducing the similarities between the rapes of the pregnant women and the murders. This type of evidence would be too prejudicial to the defendant.
I recall an incident where on a blackboard, if my memory serves me correctly, that had been covered with a paper. I was going to use the blackboard in the questioning of a witness, and the jury was in the box, and I walked over to the blackboard to raise this paper to have the witness draw on the blackboard, and somebody had written across the blackboard, "framed," apparently anticipating that I might be using that blackboard. I can't recall exactly what I said. I remember erasing the word "framed" that was on there, but I'm sure it was not done in an earlier trial. I rather suspect that it was during the same trial.
The defense called a chemist who said that the hair comparisons made by the OSBI were certainly similar, but that was all. He drew the analogy that my thumbs look alike, but they aren't. A woman and her son attempted to implicate another man as the probable murderer. Agents had discredited their story weeks before, and scientific tests had excluded the man as a suspect. An ex-jailer, who the sheriff had fired in 1973, testified that he remembered seeing the photographs found in cave number 1 in the sheriff's desk after Gene Hart escaped. The sheriff denied the charge and produced the property receipt signed by Hart that showed the pictures were not in his possession when he was in jail. The defense rested without Gene Hart taking the stand.
Does a jury have the courage to do, what is right? That is the big question, because I felt the evidence was clear. I feel it spoke for itself about Gene Hart's guilt.
The newspaper accounts at the time and listening to people in the community discuss the issue, there was certainly a belief that some evidence had been planted. In fact, there was real concern, I think, among a lot of people, myself included, that if Hart were guilty, the fact that the apparent fact that the sheriff and the investigators tried to overplay it by planting of evidence probably persuaded the jury to believe that they didn't have a very good case.
It was 11 o'clock at night when Crying Wolf met his co-conspirator, the sheriff of Mays County, in the courtyard of the old courthouse. The sheriff was stung by the accusations that he was railroading Hart and had planted the pictures of the women found in the cave. Frustrated and angered, he asked Crying Wolf if there was an Indian way to determine who was lying. The medicine man's help came in the form of the old one, the most powerful of all medicine tobacco. To Crying Wolf, the issue was simple.
Gene Hart stood on the blood of those little girls and told God Almighty that he didn't do this. And there was other people, if you will, on the other side of the fence, standing on that same blood, and said, Gene Hart did this. And to use that old tobacco to bring this out was the ultimate purpose.
The use of the old tobacco conformed to the significance of the number 4 in Cherokee culture. As Crying Wolf prayed, the sheriff, still weakened from a heart attack, placed 4 equal portions of the old one at the 4 corners of the courthouse. The number 4 was to be significant in Gene Hart's life. As the 4th portion was deposited, Crying Wolf prayed for the ultimate truth. But what was the ultimate truth?
The ultimate truth is life and death. And this is the ultimate test of the ancient one, to determine if Gene Hart or another person would die as a result of this terrible thing that was done.
When the jury went out on an afternoon, we really had not anticipated it to end right then, so we were not really prepared to spend the night, but we did, and didn't go back home. Early the next morning, we went over to the courthouse, and I sat in the courthouse by myself in the courtroom for quite a while thinking about it, and was actually sitting there when they said the verdict is in.
And the courtroom was packed. There was standing room only. I finally edged my way in near the side of the jury box, between the jury box and the judge's bench, waiting for the announcement of the verdict.
And it just took a second for them to read it.
Total hush over the courtroom as the verdict was announced.
We heard a noise when we heard the verdict. Because of their jubilation, we looked over there and they were celebrating.
I was parking the car, and Georgianne and Mike went ahead. And by the time I walked in the courthouse and got to the bottom of the stairs to the second floor, people were running down the stairs shouting and screaming.
And then it was pandemonium in the courtroom. People were hugging Hart's lawyers. They were hugging Gene Hart. I saw people with the media hugging Gene Hart and Gene Hart's family. There was yelling and laughing in there. It was mass hysteria on that side of the courtroom.
Said the verdict was in. Of course, I can't remember who I asked because they ran by, and they said he's not guilty.
On the other side of the courtroom, where the families of the victims sat, they just bowed their heads, and you could tell they were in shock. They just couldn't believe that had happened.
Second to the shock of learning about her death. I think I could compare it to that.
Charlie stand. It was just unbelievable.
And the judge tried to restore some semblance of order there in the courtroom as the deputies walked over and took control of Gene Hart.
Well, we all went to the district attorney's office, and in there everyone was just crying. It was just very emotional, very tearful. Everybody was upset.
We did step in the judge's chambers momentarily, who just said to us that in our system of justice, even people who are guilty sometimes are free.
We were escorted out of the courthouse to our car, which we had been done several times during the trial.
It was kind of like just being thrown out of town, and that was not their intent, but they were concerned about us.
And we left the courthouse and walked over to the sheriff's office, and I asked them to release to me everything of Lori's that they had. And we took all of those things and put them in our car and went by the cemetery as we got back into Tulsa and went home. It was the first time I had looked at a lot of the things that they had held as evidence. And it was in the overall picture of things that are bad and worse, that was probably one of the hardest things that I ever did, was looking at the shirt that Lori had on, the shoes that were by her bed, her sleeping bag that my mom and dad had given her. It was real hard, and it was 2 years after Lori died when the trial was over. And I know that we were in worse shape then than we were that first day.
After his acquittal, Gene Hart was returned to prison to complete his sentences for rape and burglary. A few weeks later, after an intense hour of lifting weights, he began his evening run in the prison exercise yard. The June sun had disappeared behind the prison wall, leaving a chilling shadow and the rumble of distant thunder. June had always been an eventful month in his tumultuous life. This June day was an anniversary of sorts for Gene Hart. It was 13 years ago today, almost to the hour, that he had begun his criminal life with the abduction and the rape of 2 Tulsa women. It had also been an early June evening when he burglarized the 4 Tulsa homes. And of course, 3 children had been murdered on an evening in early June. It was theorized that Oklahoma's chaotic spring storms and accompanying changes in barometric pressure may have contributed to this June behavior. But, at best, it was just a theory. And besides, it was much easier to dismiss the June behavior as coincidence. Shortly before 7 o'clock on the last June evening of his life, Gene Leroy Hart collapsed and died.
I'm sure that a lot of people will argue that justice was finally done, and other people are going to argue that he never should have been there, and that possibly by being put in prison, this caused his death from whatever source.
In the hills of northeastern Oklahoma, a medicine man not only found significance in the month that Hart died, but also in the day he died. It was June the 4th.
Did we abuse an innocent man, or did we turn an innocent or guilty man loose? But what is so important is the fact that we take this time to reflect and say, how can we make things better? So if we don't change, if we don't constantly prove to make our system better, then there's going to be lots and lots of Girl Scout murders out there.
Just changed everything. And it took a long time to ever be able to go back out and not be afraid of being in the woods or sleeping outside at night. And I can't imagine how the parents had to deal with, losing their kids. But I know how I felt and what I felt I lost. Just my innocence.
I just don't know how people deal with those kinds of griefs and how best to do it. But I know that everybody, and especially in the Indian community, was equally appalled at what happened and felt very strongly about it.
I just tried to face it all a little bit at a time. I was just trying to think about it a little bit at a time. And I went back to the school where she had, and worked another year for the school where she attended, hoping that it would help me to adjust. And probably one of the things that helped me most, other than my belief in God, is that the children that were her friends, they always took time to come and see me.
There is never any time that I don't go out hiking or camping or anything that I don't smell Camp Scott, because it was like a second home to me. And when I smell the trees or a creek, I always go back, no matter what.
There is a place in all of us reserved for the uncluttered simplicity of good thought. It is a harbor for sweet memories and special moments. It is a refuge where things are remembered through the innocence of a child's eyes. And now for many of us, this place has more precious treasure. 3 little girls who laugh and play through an eternity of swimming hole days and lightning bug nights.